welcome to this, the first Socratic Club meeting of this academic year. For those of you unfamiliar with this organization, the very first Socratic Club was started by C.S. Lewis at Oxford University in 1941 with the goal of providing an open forum for the discussion of intellectual difficulties associated with religion and with Christianity in particular. 6 years ago, a group of students established a similar organization on the Oregon State campus. Each year, the club features 6 debates, which provide a forum for opposing points of view on subjects of contemporary debate at the intersection of Christianity and contemporary culture. Tonight's debate, titled, "Is Christianity Good for the World?" is part of Cicero's Podium, Great Issues Debate Series, administered by the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. Each debate seeks to exemplify civil discourse, promote genuine intellectual diversity, and encourage the rising generation to think about the people and the ideas that have formed our experience in ordered liberty. To watch other Cicero's Podium debates, or to become a member of ISI, please visit www.isi.org. This debate focuses on what is arguably one of the most important questions in the culture wars of today. A number of recent books, such as Sam Harris's The End of Faith, Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion, and Christopher Hitchens' God is Not Great, argue that religion in general, and Christianity in particular, constitute a harmful force in society, fostering intolerance, anti-intellectualism, and the oppression of women. The conservative author Dinesh D'Souza, and cultural scholar, and the libertarian skeptic writer and social scientist Michael Shermer will discuss these and related issues tonight. In this debate, we will follow this format. Each speaker will have approximately 25 minutes to give his monologue. We will follow this with a series of questions for roughly 15 minutes. This will be followed by the time for the audience to question the speakers, and finally, the speakers will give their closing remarks. Before I introduce the first speaker, I'm going to lay down a few house rules. Because of problems in the past, we ask that you not distribute flyers from anybody other than the Socratic Club or ISI during this debate. Also, please take this opportunity to turn off your cell phones. This is being recorded. And finally, we ask that you sit back, hold on to your questions until it's your time, and enjoy the discussion. Our first speaker tonight is Dinesh D'Souza. He's a fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. Investor Business Daily called him one of the top young public policy makers in the country. And the New York Times Magazine named him one of America's most influential conservative thinkers. Before joining the Hoover Institution, Mr. D'Souza was the John M. Olin Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. From 1985 to 1987, he was managing editor of Policy Review. In 97 to 98, he served as senior policy analyst at the Reagan White House. His books include the New York Times bestseller, What's So Great About America? His 1991 book, Illiberal Education, was the first study to publicize the phenomenon of political correctness. His latest book, What's So Great About Christianity, came out this week. D'Souza's articles have appeared in New York Times, Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic Monthly, Vanity Fair, New Republic, and National Review. Mr. D'Souza.
Thank you very much. I see I have a wide podium. I guess I didn't have to wear pants. I'm very pleased, very honored to be here. I want to thank ISI and the Socratic Club for putting this event together. It's not a typical event on campus these days. To take issues that deal with religion, bring them to the forefront, and fill an auditorium of this size is a tribute to the organizers and also to you. Our time in this debate is so limited. I have so much to say. I will try in my opening remarks to adopt the motto that King Henry VIII used with one of his wives. He said, "I won't keep you very long." We're here to talk about what is in some ways a universal but also a personal subject. I thought I would tell you just a little bit about myself and my way of thinking about this, and then also a little bit about the kind of approach I'm going to adopt in this debate. I'm a native of Bombay, India. I come from a part of India that's called Goa, which used to be, for many centuries, a Portuguese colony. I once asked my grandfather how our family became Christian, and he answered in 3 words: the Portuguese Inquisition. And so I discovered quite young in life that Christianity came to me, in a sense, at the point of a bayonet. And then yet interestingly, as I grew older and looked into it a little bit, I discovered that the Indians who converted to Christianity, most of them came from the so-called Dalit or untouchable class. So, frozen as they were in a bottom-rung status in life from which they were, no matter what their efforts, unable to escape, many people found in Christianity a doctrine of dignity and an assertion of the worth of individual life, and this was a powerful incentive for lots of low-caste Indians to flee into the arms of the missionaries. So it's possible that some bayoneting was involved, but it was also the case that the Indians found a great appeal and have remained over the centuries by their own choice, Christian. I'm kind of inspired by the idea of the Socratic Club and the idea of having a debate which is not just a bit of a shouting match. A week from today I'm debating Christopher Hitchens, the author of God Is Not Great, in New York City, and he's a little bit of a spear chucker and I'm a little bit of a spear returner. But I think tonight I'm going to attempt, at least to initiate, a debate in which we genuinely are struggling to kind of get at the truth. The Socratic approach, I think, is a very good one for a university community. Now, we're talking about the role of Christianity in the West and in the world. And right away we realize that even though Christianity is a strong force in America, it is not a strong force in the public life of America. You could come from Mars and walk around America, watch the TV shows, go to the public square, and in some ways be very surprised to learn that the majority of Americans are in fact Christian. You don't see that much evidence of it in American public life. There is also, I want to suggest, in American intellectual life, a prejudice against Christianity. And this is not an overt prejudice. You don't have professors openly denouncing Christianity, scorning the resurrection, but if you look at the very language of the way we describe history, for example, the Christian era, the Dark Ages. The Christian era followed by the Renaissance, the Enlightenment. Enlightenment from what? Presumably from the prejudices implanted in Christianity. So all I'm trying to suggest is that the very vocabulary in which we think about history implants in our minds this idea of an era dominated by low and bad and dark things, followed by a sequence of wonderful things culminating, if you will, in the present. This sort of simple-minded view of history I'm going to try to contest. I'm also going to try to contest another idea that many people have, which is that as society becomes more modern, more urbanized, more educated, more enlightened, it becomes more secular. If you look at the example of Europe, you seem to have some corroboration of the secular thesis, but America is at the forefront of modernity, and America is a lot less secular than Europe. Moreover, the rapidly modernizing countries in the world today, India and China, are not only religious, but becoming evidently more so. I want to zoom in now and look a little bit at Christianity's role in the world, and specifically, what would our world be like if we didn't have Christianity? I think of Western civilization as shaped by two pillars. On the one hand, Athens, and on the other hand, Jerusalem. By Athens, I mean classical reason. I'm thinking specifically of Greece and pre-Christian Rome. And by Jerusalem, I mean Judaism and Christianity. Without these two pillars, we would not have Western civilization as we know it, and the main institutions of the West have emerged out of a creative dynamic between Athens and Jerusalem. Very often in the academy, we give a lot of credit to Athens. We have an appropriately reverential attitude toward Athens. But we have a somewhat more scornful attitude toward Jerusalem. We underestimate Jerusalem's contribution, and this is particularly so because Athens, as we know it, is known to us through Jerusalem. In other words, the Aristotle that we know is not necessarily Aristotle as the ancient Greeks saw him, but Aristotle as he has been perceived, if you will, through the lens of Christian history and Christian culture. If you think of the life of the ancient Greeks, it was in a way quite barbaric. It was a society for all its accomplishments in philosophy and art, accomplishments, I remind you, reserved to an infinitesimal portion of the population. These were societies dominated by slavery. They were societies in which human life had very little value. When the Spartans left their children, whether they were feeble or unfit, on the countryside to die of cold, they didn't stand out particularly for doing so. The attitude was ultimately a relatively low sense of human worth. Women were treated very poorly in ancient Greece and Rome. They were seen as a sort of appendage of their husbands. Aristotle, who's relatively enlightened on this matter, basically said that in the slave, reason is completely absent. In the child, reason is present, but undeveloped. In women, reason is present, but unused. And this reflects, if you will, the widespread perception of the ancient world. Christianity comes along and introduces some very new values. For the first time, human life takes on a sort of new worth. For the first time, the ordinary person, who mattered very little in Greece and Rome, suddenly becomes the object of a certain dignity, and the pursuits of the ordinary person, family life, trade, industry, bettering yourself, having, if you will, a decent life. We see this idea emerging through Christian history being emphasized in the Reformation. In a way I'll talk about in a moment, science, in the way we understand it today, is based on faith-based assumptions, so that even the scientist practicing today, whether he or she realizes it or not, is actually operating in a Christian framework which, if you were to remove it, modern science would come to an end. If you look at values that even secular people cherish, the value of individualism, that the individual matters, the social value of compassion. If somebody is suffering, you should feel for him or her. You should do something to alleviate that. Have you noticed that when there's a big famine or tsunami or catastrophe, the Western nations of the world all rush to help? And this seems natural to us. People don't think twice about it. It's the way we are. But it's not the way that human nature is. And the proof of that is that when tsunamis happen, other people in other cultures don't seem to react in the identical way. They react, if you will, with the philosophy expressed by the Russian proverb, the tears of strangers are only water. In a way, the Russians are very much in a Darwinian tradition, by which I mean the idea that as surviving beings in a dog-eat-dog world, we should help those who are closely related to us. We should help our family, we should help our neighbors, we should help our tribe, but why on earth should we even put ourselves out for a guy who is nothing to us? Christianity introduces this notion and universalizes it. that we, in a sense, are all in this together, and we owe. Now, if you go back to ancient Greece and Rome, there was a virtue, not compassion. Aristotle actually scorns the idea of compassion. Aristotle celebrates liberality or magnanimity. Magnanimity is a demonstration of the superior man showing his greatness in deigning to help the lesser man. Magnanimity exists within a structure of inequality. It's very different from the notion of sympathy or compassion. We're all in this together. Let me talk, if I may, about the issue of equality. I was reading in Sam Harris's book, "The Christians have got to bear some responsibility for the institution of slavery. Didn't the Christians compromise with slavery for centuries?" and so on. Well, we have to remember that slavery was a universal institution. It existed in every society known to man. The Chinese had it, the Asian Indians had it, there were slaves in the Americas before Columbus got here. In a way, slavery for centuries was uncontroversial. It did not need any defenders because it had no critics. It was kind of like the family. Christianity is the first institution in the world that made slavery controversial. Christianity is the first movement in the world to create and lead an anti-slavery movement. First the Quakers and then the evangelical Christians basically said this. They said, look, we learn from our faith that all men are equal in the eyes of God. And for centuries, this was seen as a spiritual insight. It applied to the next world, but not necessarily to this world. But the Quakers and the evangelical Christians said, if we are all equal in the eyes of God, it follows that no man has the right to rule another man without his consent. And this idea became the foundation not only for anti-slavery, not only for the abolition movement, it also became the moral foundation of democracy. Democracy, too, is based on the principle that no man has the right to rule another without consent. So Christianity here becomes, if you will, the soil out of which the anti-slavery movement, representative democracy, grows. And that's why these things happened in the West and nowhere else. They could be exported abroad later, but they started in this civilization and no other. Now ask yourself this question: why is modern science a Western idea? In other words, if you go to other cultures, you have intellectual curiosity. The Mayans develop a calendar, the Chinese recorded the eclipses, the Hindus invented the number 0, but science, in the structure that we have it today, as a kind of institution, science seems to have developed not in every civilization, but in this one. Why? I want to suggest that the reason it did is science is based ultimately on an assumption that can only be described as theological. In fact, not one, but 3 theological premises, all derived from Christianity. Premise number 1, the universe as a whole is rational. The universe as a whole follows laws. Now, this may seem very obvious to you if you've taken a physics class and you go, well, yeah, so? But the point is, it's not obvious. In fact, there is no necessity that it should be so. The Muslim thinker Al-Ghazali says that the universe exists in the mind of God. God intervenes at every single second to make everything that happens. It's not a question of law, it's a question of divine governance of everything that occurs. But no, modern science is based on the notion of a regular, an orderly, a lawful universe. Second, modern science is based on the idea that the rationality of the universe is comprehensible in the language of mathematics. If you think about it, this is a little bit odd. We know that human beings can act purposefully or lawfully, but how does the electron know what to do? How do inanimate objects know how to follow rules? And what rules? Newton's inverse square law, Einstein's rules. We have matter behaving as if it was purposeful, as if it was following a pattern or a program. So the universe is rational, it follows the rules of mathematics, and third, the rules of the universe are comprehensible to us. We can figure them out. That's odd if you think about it as well. Why should the neurons working in your head match and somehow be able to capture the rationality of the world out there. Now, as a Christian, I can answer those questions theologically. The universe is rational because it mirrors the rationality of God. It follows rules because the Creator is lawful and chose to make that kind of a universe. It is accessible to us because we have a stamp of the divine image, if you will, a mark of divine rationality in us, and therefore it's no surprise under a theological assumption that there is a sort of correspondence between the rationality out there and the rationality in here. But my point is that if you're an atheist, you have no way of knowing any of those things. Let's take a simple example. It is a premise of science that the laws of the universe follow a pattern of universality. For example, the speed of light, as measured, is considered to be the same everywhere in the universe. If I measure the speed of light in this room, 186,000 miles a second, I measure it on Jupiter, 186,000 miles a second, I assume that if I were to go to a star 5,000 light years away, the speed of light would be the same. Do I know that? Have I measured it? No. I assume it. I presume it. It is my operating model. Again, if you are a theist, you can say, well, yes, God has essentially ordained laws, and these laws are consistent, they're universal. But if you're an atheist, you don't know it. You are guessing. You are making this stuff up. You are operating, if you will, on theological assumptions, whether you are man enough to admit it or not. Now, not surprisingly, most of the great scientists of the past 5 centuries have been religious. Most of them, in fact, have been Christians. This is true of Boyle, Kepler, Galileo, Newton, the list goes on. And not only were they Christians, which right away, by the way, should give you pause when you hear the arrogant claims of people like Dawkins, and Dawkins is supposed to be the leading publicizer of science in the world. But Newton was the leading doer of science in the world. And Newton not only saw no contradiction between his faith and science, but even more, these great scientists saw their work as motivated by and leading to a discovery of the divine handiwork in the universe. A good example of this would be Kepler. When Kepler did his work, he discovered that the planets don't seem to be moving in perfect circles. And the theologian said to him, well, wouldn't God use the perfect image, which is the circle? And Kepler said, you know what, I'm pretty convinced that whatever pattern God used, when I just discover it, I will show you it is a far more beautiful, intricate, symmetrical, and ingenious pattern than you have thought of. And this, in fact, motivates my work to discover that pattern. And when Kepler laid out his 3 laws, he said very beautifully and very piously, this is ultimately the reflection of the handiwork of God. I've talked a little bit about science, a little bit about history, and I want to turn to a very common argument made on the other side, which is an argument made against Christianity and against religion, which is, isn't it true that for all its accomplishments, even if you admit them, that Christianity is responsible for a lot of the crimes and violence of the world, the violence of history, and moreover, if we look at the problems in the world today, from Northern Ireland to 9/11, we see that religion appears to have a pretty nefarious role in the world. I want to try to answer this argument in a rational way. First of all, as I look around the world, I see a lot of people fighting, and to the naive glance, it appears to be that they're fighting about religion. But if you look a little more closely, you see right away that they're not. Why are the Israelis and the Palestinians fighting? Are they fighting about whether Moses or Muhammad was a greater prophet? No. They're fighting over a piece of land that they both think belongs to them. Why are the Hindus and the Muslims fighting? They're fighting over Kashmir, not over religion. In Northern Ireland, they're fighting over identity and self-determination and self-rule. There's a joke about a guy in Belfast as he steps out of his apartment. A guy jumps behind him and says, pointing a gun to his head, Catholic or Protestant? And the guy says, actually, I'm an atheist. And the man says, Catholic atheist or Protestant atheist? But point of the joke is, it's not really about religion. I think one of the things that the new atheists have done is to cunningly look at the crimes committed by the Islamic radicals in the name of Islam and to try to foist those same crimes on Christianity. Even if you look at history, you look at the Crusades, well, the Crusades were a response to Muslim invasion and Muslim conquest. The Middle East was mostly Christian before the Muslims came along. They conquered it. Islamic armies came into Europe. They conquered parts of Italy, all of Spain. They overran the Balkans. They were at the gates of Vienna. Even Gibbon, no friend of Christianity, says that if the Christians hadn't blocked Muslim irredentism, today most of us would all be attending universities in which we'd be reading the Quran in the Arabic language. In other words, the Crusades were a necessary, although clumsy and ultimately only partially effective, way to block Islamic invasion and conquest. The Inquisition. I read Henry Cayman's book of the authoritative study of the Inquisition. I discovered the number of people killed in the Inquisition over 3 centuries, 2,000. I read a book on the Salem witch trials, a scholarly study, the number of people put to death in Salem, 18. Yes, that's 2018 too many. But what about the crimes of atheism? Crimes committed not 500 or 1,000 years ago, but in our lifetimes, in the last century, by atheist regimes in the name of atheism. Richard Dawkins says, well, they didn't do it in the name of atheism. Oh, really? Have you read Marx's Communist Manifesto? Have you read the Communist Manifesto? Have you read the works of Lenin? Have you read Stalin, Mao, Hitler? All of them wanted not simply, they wanted to create a new man and a new utopia, liberated from traditional religion and traditional morality. And so they followed Dostoevsky's maxim, if God is not, everything is permitted. These 3 atheist dictators in a space of 4 decades killed more than 100 million people. I'm not even counting the second tier of atheists. I'm not counting Pol Pot. He has about 2 million. Fidel Castro, Ceausescu, Kim Jong-il. The list goes on. My point is atheism, not religion, and most certainly not Christianity, is responsible for the mass murders of history. The bottom line of it, folks, is that we live in a world where human nature, as Immanuel Kant said, it's the crooked timber of humanity, out of which no straight thing was ever made. Everybody has done some bad things, and some bad things have been done in the name of religion. But on the balance, when you compare the things that were done and the good that was done, we see that Christianity has come like a light into the world. It has made what we call Western civilization and all its values, it has made the world a huge degree better. At the end of it, I think we can all say, even Michael Shermer, thank God for Christianity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dinesh, for encouraging me to project a little bit better. Our next speaker is Dr. Michael Shermer. He is the publisher of Skeptic Magazine, a monthly columnist for Scientific American, and an adjunct professor in the School of Politics and Economics at Claremont Graduate University. Dr. Shermer's latest book is The Mind of the Market on Evolutionary Economics. His last book was Why Darwin Matters, Evolution and the Case Against Intelligent Design. And he is the author of science fiction, Where the Known Meets the Unknown, The Science of Good and Evil, Why People Cheat, Gossip, Share, Care, and Follow the Golden Rule, and How We Believe, Science, Skepticism, and the Search for God. He is also the author of Why People Believe Weird Things, on pseudoscience, superstitions, and other confessions of our time. Dr. Shermer has an MA in experimental psychology from California State University, Fullerton, and a PhD in the history of science from Claremont Graduate University. Dr. Shermer?
doing? Yes, how we doing?
All right.
All right, thank you, good. Yes, well, it's good to be here, and I had a really weird thing happen. Let's see, are we picking me up here okay? Can you hear me all right? Let's just check this. All right, how about that now? There we go. Okay. The voice of God has spoken. How many Christians, by the way, are here tonight? Yeah. Oh, Jesus Christ. Oh, sorry. Look at the time. So today I had about an hour and a half to kill after checking in at the beautiful downtown Hilton Garden Inn here across the street. And so I put on my suit and I went out for a little walkabout, and well, this weird thing happened. A couple months ago, I was in Las Vegas, and I went to a magic show, Penn and Teller's magic show, in which the final act of the show, Penn and Teller do this double bullet catch, where they shoot shoot a .357 Magnum across the stage, and they catch the bullet in their teeth, and to prove that they're not doing some sleight of hand, even though of course they are. They have volunteers from the audience come up and sign the bullet casing in the one, and then sign the bullet itself, so that after the guns are fired, you can see that the bullet casing is still in the gun, and the bullet that's signed has now gone to the other side of the cage and is in the other guy's mouth, right? Anyway, so I got to be one of the volunteers to go up and sign my bullet, right? So I went up and I signed the bullet, and the bullet catch happened, and of course, I don't know how the trick is done, but it's done very well. And anyway, I got to keep my bullet. So I put this bullet in my jacket pocket. It was this coat I was wearing today that had the bullet in it. I completely forgot about it. Anyway, so I walk out of the Hilton Garden Inn, and just as I'm going around the sidewalk, I hear this noise from above, the fourth story up there, and I look up, and it's a crazed evangelist has heaved a Gideon's Bible out the window, and it comes hurtling at me. The Bible strikes me in the chest. It would have gone right through my heart if it weren't for that bullet. Stopped it. So I think that's a portent of things to come tonight, because I have to sort of turn things around a little bit. I want to make 5 points tonight in my 25 minutes. I used to be a born-again Christian. I went to Pepperdine University, where we went door to door witnessing for people. We used to call it Amway, sort of Bible, Amway on Bibles, something like that. And then later I became a born-again atheist, and I went around to those same doors and basically took it all back. And then I became, I guess what you might call a militant agnostic. I don't know and you don't either. It's a bumper sticker I once saw. I think that best summarizes it, or the old joke, what do you get when you cross a Jehovah's Witness with an atheist? It's someone who knocks on your door for no reason at all. So the answer to our question tonight is Christianity good for the world? The obvious answer is it depends. I mean, this is like asking, is government good for the world? Well, which government? I mean, religion is a huge, complex, socially entrenched entity that does all sorts of things, good and bad. Personally, I support, my favorite charity is World Vision. It's an evangelical Christian group because it works, and one of my best friends is head of their PR department. I adopted a little girl through them and so on. So there's plenty of good things that religion does. And the problem with a confrontational debate like this is, of course, his job is to tick off all the good things, and my job is to tick off all the bad things. And really, of course, the answer is both. And the question on the table then is, in balance, in the main, is Christianity doing slightly more good than bad, or slightly more bad than good? And I'm reminded of Winston Churchill's description of Americans, when he said, you can always count on Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else. And I guess that's my sense about religion. You can always count on religion to do the right thing after it's tried everything else. Eventually they do get around to it for other reasons. So, my second point then, since it's clear that we're debating a complex issue, which Christianity and good for whom? Catholic, Protestant, Evangelical, Mormon, Episcopalian, Pentecostal. According to the 2001 World Christian Encyclopedia, there are no less than 33,820 Christian denominations. 33,000 worldwide Christian denominations. Which Christianity is doing the good and which is not? And good for whom? Individuals, society, communities, political states? What are we talking about? This is not defined. I mean, we have Protestant Christians determined to murder Catholic Christians over turf and politics in Northern Ireland. This is not good. Mormon Christians who belong to the fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ, the Latter-day Saints, believe that it is acceptable to force 13-year-old girls to have sex with men 5 times their age. This is not good. Pentecostal Christians who indoctrinate young children at Jesus camps into becoming warriors for Christ who are willing to kill for their Lord. This is not good. Evangelical Christians who believe so strongly in the sanctity of life that they blow up abortion clinics and murder doctors. This is not good. Or Catholic Christians whose priestly pedophile program of, in the words of my friend Christopher Hitchens, "No child's behind left." This is not good. Speaking of homosexuality, my third point is a case study of what's wrong with religion today, especially with Christianity. You guys are really missing the boat here on homosexuality and gay marriage. You'll get around to it eventually for other reasons, as my Churchillian quote said. The overwhelming evidence from science shows that gender preferences are primarily determined by genetics and prenatal biochemistry, especially embryological hormone balance. Almost everyone is born attracted to members of the opposite sex. A tiny percentage, maybe 1 or 2%, maybe even less than 1%, are attracted to members of the same sex. So what? Asking a homosexual when he or she chose to become gay is like asking a heterosexual when he or she chose to become straight. Nevertheless, on this particular issue, Christianity remains mired in pre-civil rights, pre-enlightenment, pre-scientific, medieval, barbaric thinking, basing their beliefs on a single biblical passage, Leviticus 18:22, "Thou shalt not lie with mankind as with womankind, it is abomination." This quote, by the way, this commandment, is tucked in between other passages that instruct parents to kill disobedient children and to execute adulterous wives and non-virgin brides. That's right, the death penalty for adultery. Well, if we impose this today, this would immediately eliminate a good number of Christian congressmen and senators, preachers, and televangelists. You might ask yourself why some of these preachers and politicians like Ted Haggard or Larry Craig are so obsessed with being against homosexuality. Methinks the gentleman doth protest too much, as we've now seen in those 2 cases. Whenever somebody obsesses about gays, you might suspect them of something else going on there, in my opinion. Anyway, as a consequence of this embarrassing lapse of Christian charity and Jesus' doctrine of love for all humanity, Christian preachers and writers, theologians think nothing of tormenting gays by telling them that their desire to love another person of the same sex is an abomination, by telling them that they have a disease that can be cured through a treatment. These treatment programs, by the way, involve things like watching football. I mean, it's so pathetic. It's something you would see as satire on the Stephen Colbert Report. And that promiscuity is evil, but that the single best prophylactic against promiscuity, marriage, is legally banned from them. Christians actually believe that they're being charitable by proclaiming that they hate the sin but not the sinner, which is not dissimilar to what Christians declared just before torching women for allegedly practicing witchcraft in order to save their souls because we love them. Or when Christians called for pogroms against Jews for being Christ killers. May I point out that if Jesus had to die for your sins, that means somebody had to kill him. So instead of hating Jews for this, you should thank them. Judas should have a statue in Jerusalem as the hero for the guy who did it. Anyway, mark my words, here is what is going to happen. Within a decade, maybe 2 or 3, Christians will come around to treating gays no differently than they now treat members of other groups whom they previously persecuted, women, Jews, and blacks, but not because of some new interpretation of a biblical passage or because of some new revelation from God. These changes will come about the same way they always do, by the oppressed minority fighting for the right to be treated equally, and by a few enlightened members of the oppressing majority supporting their cause. Then what will happen is that Christians will take credit for the civil liberation of gays, dig through the historical record, find a few Christian bloggers or preachers who had the courage and the character to stand up for gay rights and their fellow Christians when their fellow Christians would not, and then cite those as evidence that were it not for Christianity, gays would not be equal. Anyway, well, okay, that's enough on that. Point 4, last 2 points. Religion and societal morality, and then religion and individual morality. In a 2005 study published in the Journal of Religion and Society, independent scholar Gregory Paul found an inverse correlation, that is, as one variable goes up, the other one goes down, between religiosity, as measured by belief in God, biblical literalism, and frequency of prayer and service attendance, and societal health, measured by rates of homicide, suicide, childhood mortality, life expectancy, sexually transmitted diseases, abortion, and teen pregnancy in 18 developed democracies. In general, higher rates of belief in and worship of a creator, this is nationally now, across these 18 different democratic nations. Higher rates of belief in and worship of a creator correlate with higher rates of homicide, juvenile early adult mortality, STD infection rates, teen pregnancy, and abortion in the prosperous democracies. Paul concludes, quote, "The United States is almost always the most dysfunctional of the developed democracies, sometimes spectacularly so. The United States scores the highest by far in religiosity of these 18 developed democracies, and the highest by far in homicides, STDs, abortions, and teen pregnancies." Now, conservative Christians, of course, will blame secular liberals for all of these societal evils. But with over 90% of Americans proclaiming themselves to be Christians, and the country roughly divided 50-50 between conservative and liberals, the math doesn't add up. Whatever else may be the cause of these different social ills, obviously religion is not a prophylactic against those things. It is not a moral guideline to control those kinds of issues. 5, finally, religion and individual morality. 1934, Abraham Franzblau found a negative correlation between acceptance of religious beliefs and 3 different measures of honesty. As religiosity increased, honesty decreased. 1950, Murray Ross conducted a survey among 2,000 associates of the YMCA and discovered that agnostics and atheists were more likely to express their willingness to aid the poor than those who rated themselves as deeply religious. 1969, sociologists Travis Hershey and Rodney Stark reported no difference in the self-reported likelihood to commit crimes between children who attended church regularly and those who did not. 1975, Ronald Smith, Gregory Wheeler, and Edward Diner discovered that college-age students in religious schools were no less likely to cheat on a test than their atheist and agnostic counterparts in non-religious schools. 1996, George Barna, a born-again evangelical Christian and professional pollster, in his index of leading spiritual indicators, based on interviews with nearly 4,000 adult Americans, revealed, quote, "Born-again Christians continue to have a higher likelihood of getting divorced than do non-Christians." And, quote, "Atheists are less likely to get divorced than are born-again Christians." Barna found that the current divorce rate for born-again Christians is 27%, while it is only 24% for non-Christians. In addition, yeah, amen. In addition to baby boomers, the generation often criticized for sexual indulgence and moral relativism has a lower rate of divorce, 34%, than the preceding generation, portrayed in popular culture as the idealized 1950s Ozzie and Harriet family, who hover around 37%. All right, that's 1996. How about 5 years later? In a 2001 survey, Barna found that 33% of all born-again individuals who have been married have gone through a divorce, which is statistically identical to the 34% incidence among non-born-again adults. In other words, sorry for the data dump there, but the point of all this is that religion seems to have no relationship at all to marital standing, divorce, and so forth. And this, I picked George Barna because he is an evangelical Christian. His point of publishing all this data is for the church to get its own house in order, because for the obvious hypocrisy problems there. Finally, most recently, this last July-August issue of the Annals of Family Medicine published the results of a study conducted by researchers from the University of Chicago and Yale New Haven Hospital, that religious doctors were no more likely, and even slightly less likely, to employ their craft among underserved patients than were physicians with no religious affiliation. Specifically, the lead investigator on this, Farr Curlin, MD, and Associate Professor of Medicine at the University of Chicago, and his colleagues surveyed 1,820 practicing physicians from all different specialties. 31% of the physicians who were more religious practiced medicine among the underserved, compared to 35% of atheist, agnostic, and non-religious doctors. Religiosity was measured by religious service attendance and self-reported intrinsic religiosity, questions that measured the extent to which individuals embrace a religion as the master motive that guides and gives meaning to their life. Curlin noted his own shock at this. Curlin is a Christian. Quote, "This came as both a surprise and a disappointment. The Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, and Buddhist scriptures all urge physicians to care for the poor. And the great majority of religious physicians describe their practice of medicine as a calling. Yet, we found that religious physicians were not more likely to report practice among the underserved than their secular colleagues." There was one interesting finding that Curlin made. There was a difference. Those who identified themselves as very spiritual, whether they were religious or not, were roughly twice as likely to care for the underserved as those who described their spirituality as low. Quote, "Part of this divergence between religion and spirituality can be traced to a rift between Christian denominations in the late 19th and early 20th century," Curlin concludes. About a century ago, he noted, many of the mainline and liberal Protestant churches began to emphasize efforts to right social injustices, while the more conservative churches tended to stress doctrinal orthodoxy. Research indicates that those who consider themselves spiritual but not so religious are more likely to be found in the more liberal denominations. Again, the point of this is again, splitting this, Christianity is too large a concept, and we have to break this down. Who are we talking about here? Okay, it's the more liberal, the more secularized Christianities, the people that consider themselves to be spiritual. Those are the ones, at least in this study, physicians who were more likely to help. Why? Because they have their priorities straight of what really matters. Consider the difference in this own field. Say between Rick Warren, author of A Purpose-Driven Life, who I had the chance to spend a week with and found him to be a remarkable man, versus, say, the Ted Haggard, James Dobson focus on the family branch of Christianity. That is, caring and being concerned about those outside of our immediate sphere, those who are truly needy, poor, people in Africa, so on, or even the poor here, AIDS in Africa, whatnot. Versus the Ted Haggard, James Dobson approach of, we really deeply care about your personal morality, what you're doing in your private lives. If you follow the James Dobson approach of Christianity, we are to believe that the creator of the universe's biggest concern is what consenting adults are doing with their sex organs in the privacy of their bedrooms. This is what these Christians deeply care about, which I contend is where religion goes deeply wrong, especially Christianity. So in conclusion, the problem with any kind of extreme absolutism, particularly in religion where it flourishes so much, is that it leads to absolute intolerance. Once you believe that you have the absolute and final answers to moral questions, why be tolerant of those who refuse to accept your truth? Religiously based moral systems apply this principle in spades. From the medieval Crusades and the Spanish Inquisition to the Holocaust in Bosnia, History is rife with examples of intolerance. In the name of their religion, people have lighted faggots to burn women accused of witchcraft. In the name of God, religious people have sanctioned slavery, anti-Semitism, racism, homophobia, torture, genocide, ethnic cleansing, and war. Not only does religion not necessarily make one more moral, it can lead to greater intolerance, racism, sexism, and the erosion of other values cherished in a free and democratic society. Now, I guess I have about 2 minutes left, where I would disagree with my friends Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, this idea that if we just got rid of religion, this would solve these kinds of conflicts. I don't think so. I disagree with both of them and with Dinesh D'Souza. Humans are by nature tribal. We naturally divide ourselves up into in-groups and out-groups. That comes from our evolutionary heritage. Within our groups, we're very pro-social, cooperative, altruistic, and so forth. Between groups, we're very competitive, bellicose, xenophobic. And so the key to this problem is how to solve that problem. One of the things that religion does poorly is to encourage more in-group, out-group division. I think the great biblical authors have struggled with this over the ages. In the early books of the Old Testament, they talk about love thy neighbor. Well, in the early stages of the development of Judaism, thy neighbor was thy immediate fellow in-group member, in which that is who you are to project your altruism, pro-social, cooperative energies. And that's why the parts of the Old Testament are filled with all these disastrous, awful stories about the rape and murder and pillage of those other guys not in our group. That's what that was all about. By the end of the Old Testament, particularly say by the book of Ruth, thy neighbor becomes members of the out-group. So by the time the Christians get around to it with Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, the Jews had already figured this out. So there was a natural flow, a natural transition in culture to be much more inclusive of people not in our in-group. So while religion can have part of that, there's something else going on here. That religion, in my opinion, more often follows the cultural trend rather than leads it. So in conclusion, it's a huge subject. Religion is great and wonderful for many people on many levels, and that part of religion I like, including parts of Christianity that does that. But it also does many great and terrible things, great in terms of large, terrible things. And that part we can't endorse. So the point of a free society in which we have a legal system that protects us all to believe or disbelieve what we want, we can sort these things out peacefully through events like this. Thank you.